Hey folks, welcome back to the Mr. Global channel. This is Matt Randolph, energy expert. Today we're going to talk about PJM Interconnect. And if you haven't heard about PJM Interconnect, you may be living under a rock because they're in all the news headlines right now. They provide electricity to 13 states in the Northeast corridor, and they're being accused of preferring fossil fuels and driving up people's energy costs and all this sort of stuff. We're going to dig into this today. I'm going to tell you what PJM does. A lot of people don't even know what PJM does. They think they're a utility. They think they own transmission lines. They think all kinds of stuff, but they don't really know how this works. So that's what we're going to cover today. Before I get started, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate all of my new followers. Now let's get into it. Now, what's important to understand is that PJM Interconnection is not a utility or a power producer. It's a regional transmission organization, and they manage the electricity grid and the wholesale electricity market for all of these states. This is their coverage map right here, 13 different states. So what PJM does is they're a grid operator, right? They coordinate the flow of high voltage electricity across 13 states and Washington, D.C., which serves about 65 million people. They ensure there's always a balance between electricity supply and electricity demand in real time. And it is important to understand exactly what that means, okay? Here's what PJM doesn't do, okay? It does not own power plants. They do not generate electricity. They do not own the utility lines, the transmission lines. Those are owned by companies like PSE&G, First Energy, Dominion. They also don't set consumer electricity rates. That's the job of the state and public utility commissions. PJM is like air traffic control, okay? Just like the FAA doesn't own planes but ensures that they fly safely and efficiently, PJM doesn't own power plants but ensures electricity flows reliably and affordably. That is what PJM does. And to try to describe to you the difficulty of this operation, I'll just put it to you this way, okay? These are the states that PJM services: Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Maryland, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Delaware, Washington, D.C. Okay? Now, how is Kentucky and Maryland different? How is Ohio and Delaware different? How is Illinois and West Virginia different? What I'm saying is, in this group of states, in this region, you have a lot of different policies when it comes to energy, when it comes to emissions, when it comes to mandates. And PJM is expected to honor the policies of everywhere they send electricity. So if a state comes out and says, we want to be 100% clean by 2035 or 40, and the neighboring state says, we don't care about that at all, PJM has to handle that because they approve the power providers that send electricity to those states. And so one of the things I think it's very important that people understand that PJM is having to deal with is this enormous cluster of differing ideas, ideologies, and policies regarding energy, energy generation, CO2 emissions, all of it. It's all different in all these states. And they're left to try to deal with this. Now, I'm not defending PJM in any way, shape, or form. I'm just telling you these are the facts. This is what PJM has to deal with. Now, in order to ensure that there's enough electricity flowing through the system at any given time, any minute, whether it's 105 degrees outside or whether it's 10 below, whether it's July, whether it's December, in order to ensure that there's enough electricity supply in the future to meet peak demands, they have what's called an auction system. It's a capacity market, a reliability pricing model. They basically prepay power plants to be available. Not necessarily for electricity right now, but when it is needed the most. So to try to do that, they have to forecast future electricity demand, right? They estimate how much power in any region it will need 3 years in advance, and that's known as the delivery year. And when they hold these auctions, those clearing prices that they end up with are actually future clearing prices, not current. So an auction in 2025 for electricity capacity needed in summer of 28 and spring of 29. So the companies that own the power plants, coal, gas, nuclear, wind, solar, batteries, you name it, they all bid on how much capacity they can provide and at what price per kilowatt hour or per megawatt. They're not offering that energy right now. It's a commitment to be ready and capable to produce that energy in the future. So PJM selects enough capacity to meet forecast demand plus, a reserve margin or a buffer. So they always get extra. And it picks the lowest cost offers first until the need is met. Now, the real purpose of the auction is to ensure that new capacity is built exactly where it's needed. Because the prices that they realize in these auctions aren't the same in this whole area. There's many different places, substations, where the prices change. One of the complaints about PJM is sometimes they procure more capacity than they need, right? Sometimes their forecast is off, and that drives up cost to consumers. A lot of people are also making the claim that they've put up barriers for renewables, that rules have historically favored fossil fuels over newer sources like wind and solar. Keep in mind, all of these states have vastly different policies when it comes to how they want their power generated. Some of them want to be 100% clean. Some of them want coal. Some of them want natural gas. And then, of course, the federal government, they have the things that they want. They have their mandates. So this causes, significant challenges for PJM's ability to plan, to operate the grid, and to run, equitable, fair electricity markets. Because some states like New Jersey, Maryland, Illinois, they have very aggressive clean energy mandates, like 100% renewable by 2040. And you have West Virginia and Ohio who continue to support coal. So PJM is expected to maintain fuel neutral policies, but that often clashes with state goals. So when several of these states came out with their mandates for clean energy, PJM was inundated with applications for new renewable projects. And at the same time that was going on, a lot of these states were forcing the retirement of thermal generated electricity. Thermal generated electricity is natural gas, coal, and oil. And since then, they've had to delay the retirement of many of these power plants because the renewable projects aren't getting built fast enough. To understand, PJM's number one job is reliability. Just like air traffic controllers' number one job is to keep people safe and get the plane landed, that is their number one job here, reliability. Keep the grid running. That's it. The biggest problem with PJM trying to add renewables to this whole system is the amount of grid infrastructures that have to come with it. You can't retire a thermal generation system. You can't retire a coal plant and just stick solar panels in its place. You have to upgrade and modify the entire grid to accept that intermittent type of energy. They have less control over renewable energy. It works differently. This isn't a plug and play. You have to change the grid. You can retire one type of thermal energy and replace it with another very quickly and very inexpensively. But to connect, say, a solar project to the grid cost over $40 million per 100 megawatts. And it takes years to get that done because not only are you building the solar farm or the wind farm, you're also having to upgrade the entire grid up to wherever it needs to be upgraded to. Okay, so before I continue, let's just get us up to speed to where we are so far. PJM is an organization, much like air traffic control, right? It doesn't own the grid. It doesn't own the utility companies. It's actually a non-profit organization that controls the flow of electricity throughout these 13 states and Washington, D.C., and its number one objective is reliability, okay? That is the objective of PJM, is to ensure, and keep in mind, this includes Washington, D.C. We need to have reliable power in Washington, D.C. Now, I understand that a lot of what I'm saying so far probably appears as though I'm relinquishing PJM of any liability in rising electricity rates, and I'm absolutely not. I'm not even close to done. I just wanted to get you guys caught up, okay? So why do renewables cost so much more to connect at PJM than thermal generation? I've already told you this, because you have to upgrade the grid. These renewable projects tend to be in more remote locations and not in more urban areas where other thermal generation occurs. So that cost is significant. As a matter of fact, to add a solar farm to the grid under PJM's management costs about 10 times more than it does to add thermal generated power, that being coal, natural gas, oil. There are over 2,000 renewable projects in the queue, in the backlog of PJM's organization, projects waiting to be approved. Roughly half of all of the projects, renewable projects, that try to get approved and get onto PJM's, interconnect, about half of them ultimately withdraw and say, we're done. One of the reasons is the cost to connect to the grid, and the other reason is the time, taking up to 5 years to connect new renewable power to this existing grid, which was built and designed for fossil fuel companies. Okay, so there's stuff at play here. Now let's get into PJM's organization, how they're influenced. Who runs it? How does this work? Is there someone at fault for renewables not getting accepted fast enough into PJM? And would it even change the rates consumers are paying? If they added more renewable electricity to that grid, would it save those people any money? Now, one thing to understand is that PJM does not directly profit from favoring fossil fuels. But its market structure, its legacy rules, and infrastructure often indirectly favor fossil fuel generation, especially natural gas, over renewables. And here's why, right? So who manages PJM is the real question, right? And it's not fossil fuel companies. They don't manage PJM, but they do have influence through governance, right? Market participation, stakeholder representation, things of that nature. Here's a breakdown of how PJM is structured. I'm going to refer to my notes here. PJM, like I said, is a nonprofit organization, and it's governed by a independent board of managers that are not affiliated with market participants, right? And what that means is the board of managers can't be market participants in the grid, right? So it can't be fossil fuel companies or renewable companies. There is a stakeholder process that includes generators, utilities, customers, public interest groups. Those people can be fossil fuel companies, can be renewable energy companies, right? So the board of managers is appointed based on independence and expertise. They cannot have financial ties to PJM members, and they make financial decisions based on market rules, planning, and operations. But who influences PJM policy? It uses a stakeholder-driven process to develop and revise its policies and rules. And those participants do include generation owners, okay? Power generation owners. That's fossil fuel companies, gas, coal, oil, renewable companies, nuclear plant operators. It includes transmission owners, utilities like Dominion, AEP, PSE&G, right? Electricity distributors, companies that deliver power to homes, load serving entities, end-use customers, commercial, industrial, consumer groups. All of these people influence PJM policy. But fossil fuel generators are very well represented as they are the majority of the stakeholders, right? So they have a lot of influence there. One of the examples of that influence is the capacity market design. Several gas and coal generators have been pushed for rules that excluded state-subsidized renewable and nuclear from the markets. They wanted fully subsidized generators wanted rules that excluded state-subsidized generators. And those efforts were supported, of course, by fossil fuel stakeholders and obviously criticized by the renewable industry and clean energy industry. Basically, what all this means is this structure, the legacy structure of this organization favors fossil fuel companies. PJM is a nonprofit. They don't make any more money than they would if it's renewable power, if it's fossil fuel power, if the cost to send that money through the grid is $400, a megawatt, or $200 a megawatt. It doesn't matter. They don't make any more or less money. They're a nonprofit. But the stakeholders do make money. And the stakeholders in PJM are largely fossil fuel companies. Now, in PJM's defense, they've been sounding the alarm for several years over these mandates to retire thermal generation, over these requirements to go to clean energy. They've been sounding the alarm for years. It's like, hey, we don't know that these projects can be finished in time for when you plan to retire thermal-powered, generation. We don't know how this is going to work. And then when you throw in, these 13 states and Washington, D.C., who have about a 50-50 split on their own energy policies and just aren't, half the states are never going to be happy with what they do and the other half are, and vice versa. Like this is a scenario where you can't possibly make everyone happy, meet their policies, meet their mandates, provide for them what they need. It's a complete impossibility for that to happen. Now, it's important to note that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the FERC, is the U.S. government agency that regulates the interstate transmission of electricity, natural gas, and oil. It is the department that has oversight over PJM and all other interconnects. And what PJM does must be approved by the FERC, and the FERC has required them to make some changes that were seen as barriers of entry to more renewable power on that grid. Now, there's something that's very important to note here because there's a huge push right now through NGOs, non-government organizations, to force PJM to use more renewable power. And that is because they believe, or at least the message they're putting out, is that it will reduce electricity costs. That is simply not true. There is nothing at all true about that. If 100% of the electricity that flowed through the PJM Interconnect today was renewable, the price of energy or that electricity would be no different. The savings in renewable power generation are only realized by the companies that generate that power. That is not ever passed on to the end user. And I need to say that I fully support them having more renewable energy. I do fully support that, but we need to do it on the correct premise of why we need to do it. It's not going to save us money. There's more important reasons than saving us money for doing something. It's very important to have a more diverse energy portfolio. It's better for the environment. There's a lot of reasons why it's important, but it's not going to save us money, and we shouldn't be telling people it is. Do you have any questions? Please leave them in the comments section. I'm sure I missed something, but I feel like I've been rushed to do this. So many people want to know about PJM. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you for sticking with me. This is the longest YouTube video I've ever done. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Remember, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.